Everyone thinks that teens in our world today use alcohol, tobacco, or drugs to cope with everyday struggles. You may think they do,
but they don't. Welcome to the But They Don't podcast, a podcast for teens by teens. Join us as we cover substance use prevention, mental health, community conversations, and more.
Welcome back to another episode of But They Don't. I'm Sasha, and I'm excited to be here today with a special guest, Jessica Barnes. Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am Jessie, and I work for the Department of Mental Health's Office of Suicide Prevention. I'm their program manager, and I help oversee various different suicide prevention initiatives that we have for South Carolina, both for the Department of Mental Health and for our communities, and as well as oversee and help with statewide implementation of the 988 Crisis Care Continuum.
Awesome. And can you tell us about suicide in South Carolina specifically?
Yeah. So in South Carolina in 2021, we had 802 people who had died by suicide. And when we look at that number, we know that those are not just numbers. Those are people. There's somebody. And we also look at that and we see, okay, what can we do to help the people in South Carolina? And when we look at 2021 from 2020, our numbers actually decreased, whereas nationwide from 2020 to 2021, those numbers had increased for most other states. So we are a little bit hopeful because that's also the lowest number of suicide deaths that we've had since about 2015. So I think at this point right now in South Carolina, we have a lot of different things that we're doing to help people, and we are trying to spread more awareness and help with suicide prevention efforts.
Do you think those numbers decreased for us because we're doing things like this podcast where we're trying to decrease the stigma around mental health?
I definitely think that has an effect. Anytime we're opening up that door and talking about things that often is very stigmatized, we're showing it's okay to talk about this. This is not something we have to shy away from. We can bring up this conversation and let people know that this is a safe place where we can talk and make sure that we're all safe, or you're safe, or I'm safe, or just be there for each other.
Yeah, and all of us who do this podcast are teenagers. Do you feel like there are a lot more teenage suicides rather than adults, or how do those numbers differ?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, there is still more suicide deaths that are in the adult population. However, we are looking at how those rates are happening across various different age groups. So we know that it can be a very high risk population for our youth and young adults. So when we look at from 15 to 24, which is our youth and young adults, there's around 13% of the suicide deaths in 2021 were in that age range. There was around 1.2% was for 10 to 14. We are looking at that because that's also still a large number of our kids and adolescents and people who are entering into adulthood who are struggling. And we want to make sure that we're also helping all populations to make sure that we are doing the best that we can.
Of course. And with that being said, like I said earlier, we have a lot of teenagers who do stuff like this, who are trying to decrease the stigma because we know people who are dealing with these mental health issues. Do you feel like we are doing something, putting out 988 and the non-crisis line that we talked about earlier? Do you think that those are helpful?
Yeah, when we make the accessibility of our crisis numbers more available to the people, then we are helping people, which is really what it comes down to. So like with 988 and the crisis text line, our youth and young adults tend to be the highest users of some of those things. There are still a lot of users for other populations as well, but we have done a lot, I think, here in South Carolina with trying to make that number accessible to people. So like we had the student ID bill that passed in 2022. Well, the bill didn't pass in 2022, but it went into effect in 2022, where every new student ID being printed from 7th grade to higher education will have the Lifeline number on that student ID somewhere, whether it's the front or the back. And then that's also another way of universally saying everybody is going to have access to this. And we're not singling one person out saying you look like somebody who might need this number. It's saying at any point we could all need somebody to talk to, and that's normal. So let's just go ahead and give it to everybody. and do some preventative work with that.
And how can someone who feels as though they're not in a crisis get a hold of a non-crisis line? Those aren't talked about often at all. I just recently learned about them.
Yeah, there are what we call warm lines. So if you feel like a crisis is bubbling, you can look up a warm line in your area. Sometimes those are area specific. And what people don't realize is that 988 can also be used if you feel like something is bubbling up, where if you think, okay, I am feeling, I call it my cup. My cup's getting full and more full and more full. And I feel like, okay, I'm not really doing anything that's emptying out the stress in my life. Maybe I should talk to somebody right now. So I'm not fully in that crisis, and I'm seeing I am taking on a lot and I can't keep up with this. So you can reach out to them, because 988 in the whole crisis care continuum really wants to be preventative as well as with helping those people who are in a crisis.
And for those people who are in a crisis, what are some signs that we can look for? We've done podcasts in the past, but coming from a professional perspective, what do you feel and think about that?
I always think of change, because change can be something that we identify. If you know somebody and maybe they were that outgoing person, they were always talking and bubbly around people, and then they never wanted to socialize, so they're being more isolated. That is a huge change that's happening. And not all change means that somebody is thinking about suicide, but it's also a time where we want to lean in and check in on that person and see if they're okay. It could also be life changes. You think about all the transitions that can happen for a child, an adolescent, or a person who's emerging into adulthood as well. Like, those are some huge life changes that are happening. Or you're going through your own life stressors within your family or with friends, or you recently moved. Those are all changes where it's okay to reach out to supports during those hard times.
Of course. And how do you guys go about bringing up these kind of topics to children, to younger people, whether it be in elementary school or middle school, which I feel like is probably the higher demographic?
Yeah, I think with especially with kids and adolescents, you want to make sure you're talking with them on a level that they're going to understand. I will not talk to a person in elementary school about suicide the same way I would talk with a high school student, because they might not fully understand the whole concept around it or the language around what we're talking about when we say the word suicide. You want to make sure you're meeting that person with where they are developmentally, and then using just like saying, I'm here and I've been noticing this and I want to check in on you, and know that you are not having to carry that weight of trying to solve your friends' problems or what they're experiencing or the challenges in their life. Your biggest role is going to be connecting that person to a trusted adult or to a crisis resource number, really helping connect if you're seeing changes, because I know a lot of the listeners are going to be people who are in school right now. So knowing that, like, okay, if you are worried or if you're thinking about somebody while you're hearing this podcast, you don't feel that weight on your shoulders. Connect that person to care, because you will have such an impact by doing that.
Of course. And how is mental health connected to suicide? I feel like most people look at it as its own two different bubbles rather than the same thing.
Yeah. I think when we take care of our mental health, or if you then, and in a way, we're taking care of our stressors. So that's one way where I think of, okay, what is my mental wellness? What am I doing to take care of where I'm at for different emotions? Or if I know I'm going to have a very stressful event coming up, or if I'm feeling very anxious or sad, or maybe I even lost somebody, taking care of my own mental wellness and doing things that help me take care of myself is definitely something that can be very connected. And then also, if somebody has a mental illness or a mental diagnosis, it doesn't always mean that means you're going to have thoughts of killing yourself. But we also know that there's certain things that you might be having a hard time with. And I think I've said it 1,000 times, is know your supports and know your crisis numbers, because it can affect anybody, whether you are diagnosed with a mental illness or not. Suicide is never really one thing that's going on. It's usually a combination of a bunch of different things happening at one time.
Of course. Do you feel, and I think I should go back to the bubbles, You said you feel like it's a combination. Do you feel like it should be treated as its own branch, or rather a branch under mental health?
I would say both. It's definitely something that we want to talk about if you are receiving mental health services, because like one thing that the Department of Mental Health does is we do universal safety planning. So anytime a person comes in, whether they're having thoughts of killing themselves or not, we're saying, let's go ahead and make a safety plan, because you don't want to wait for a crisis to happen to think about what you would do to help yourself in that crisis. It's meant to be a plan. We want to help think about things, coping skills, places I can go to distract, people I can distract with, or safe people I can talk to before we enter that crisis. And then there's times where sometimes there are sudden changes that happen in our life, and we might not have any connection with mental health, or might not have ever talked about that before, and we still have a need because now we find ourselves in a suicide crisis. So I do think that there is a need to talk about it in both areas, because it really can affect anybody.
So can you tell me a little more about the Department of Mental Health? You mentioned it just a second ago, and I feel like a lot of people don't know enough about it.
Yeah. So no matter where you are, we are a statewide provider of care for children all the way up to adulthood. So no matter what stage you're at in life, you can find a mental health center or clinic in your area. So we cover all 46 counties here in South Carolina. So a person can reach out, set up services. It could be children and adolescent services, family services, individual therapy. In some areas we have school-based, so you might have a school-based therapist for the Department of Mental Health. It just depends from school to school. But there are many different access points that we have. And clinics are just one way. We also have a statewide mobile crisis. So anybody can reach out to that number if they ever feel like they're in the need of talking with somebody as well. And that's a statewide resource, which is why it's a little bit different than 988, because 988 is here in South Carolina. And if you're traveling to North Carolina or Georgia, you can still call 988. Whereas mobile crisis, it's here in South Carolina only. Other states do have mobile crisis, but we are one of the few that has one number you can reach out to and call them. So we do that. My office does a lot of training and outreach in our communities. We train both various different clinicians within DMH, and also if there are community people that say, I want to learn more, our office is open and we want to help. So we do a lot of trainings that way as well.
Now, as far as trainings go, are these open to the public, or is it just groups of people through businesses?
Yeah, if it'll be open to the public and businesses and if clinicians. So if you work in the mental health field, you can always reach out to my office. And if you are an individual advocate, you can always reach out to my office or reach out to your local mental health center, because sometimes they also have other things going on as well. So if you're just a one person and you want to find a class that's happening that might have an open spot, I can help you find that. Or if you're a business that says, I want to train my whole staff, then we can help get a training set up for you there too.
That's really awesome. I know earlier before we started the podcast, you were telling me about a screener. Would you like to talk about that a little?
Yes. So this is something that we just launched last week, which was the week of Suicide Prevention Week. And it is a anonymous mental health screener that parents can take on behalf of their kids or with their kids, and or guardians can take it on behalf of their children or with their children. And it will assess overall mental health, suicide ideation, substance use, and then that there's a real person that is going to look at those results and then talk back with you about what they're seeing and what resources they would recommend for the different things that are happening. And then that parent or guardian has the option to dialogue back if they have questions. If it's like, well, how do I access that? Or what can I expect at my first visit? You know, there's a real person who is there to respond back and kind of help navigate those different things. And this is done with the Department of Mental Health responds to it, as well as the Department of Children Advocacy.
And how can someone find that?
Yeah, of course, we need that. So it's the hope.connectssckids.org. And it's completely anonymous. We do ask a couple demographic questions because we would need to know what area you're in to know which resources to connect you to. But we will not know who you are unless you choose to say, hello, my name is.
And that helps a lot with people who are scared to reach out in general.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea.
Yeah, it's a kid version. We've launched the adult screener, which was for anybody 18 and older, which is hopeconnectsyou.org, and that one, or hope.connectsyou.org. And that one is for the same process, and it's answered in partnership with Deotis and Department of Mental Health. So we cover all age groups with those screeners.
That's good though, and like I said, I feel like it really does help with the idea of like, I don't want to call somebody, you know.
Anonymity, I can't even say that word. I have a hard time with that one, but you know, kind of having that way of being able to reach out, but that person might not connect it to you. It does kind of help give a person some comfort in knowing, okay, there, even though we are breaking through a lot of stigma, there could still be stigma attached to it. So it's just increasing that access to care.
Of course. And September is Suicide Awareness Month. What is some work that's surrounding that right now?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different organizations that I have seen post different things saying we are in support. And I think that helps people know that this is a safe place to go if I were struggling. The Department of Mental Health, we help host the Suicide Prevention Coalition. And if you're ever interested in watching that, it is archived on the State House webpage under the state legislators' archived videos. And it was held September 13th. And that's a great place to get updates of various different state agencies, nonprofits, partners all over South Carolina and what we're doing in suicide prevention efforts. And AFSP has various different Out of the Darkness walks that started in September. The first one was in York County, and then there's ones being held all over the state. So you can look up and find a walk in your area. The last walk is about mid-November. So there are people that are bringing up that awareness and connecting people, whether you have struggled before in your past, are currently struggling, or you may have lost somebody to suicide. I think it can bring a lot of people together.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jessica. Behavioral Health Science of Pickens County is partnering with Anderson Oconee Pickens Department of Mental Health, Pickens County, and the Department of Prohibition, Parole, and Pardon to bring Every Mind Matters into Pickens County campaign. Every Mind Matters is a multi-agency collaboration campaign whose goal is to help Pickens County talk openly about mental health, recognize signs of mental health and challenges, and find resources and seek support when needed. The aim is to inspire physical and mental wellness, reduce stigma, and prevent suicide in Pickens County. Follow each of these agencies on social media for more information. We'll be sure to pick up the links in the description in this week's episode. If you or someone you know needs help, you can always call or text 988. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being with us today. Be sure to follow on social media to keep up with PCYB. We are on Facebook as Pickens County Youth Board and on Instagram and TikTok as we are PCYB.